Let everybody in. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Glad you could make it. My name's Andrew Brown, and you're in the right place. You've come to webinar 4 in our Pharmaceutical Systems Strengthening Learning series. And our topic today is identifying key enablers for digitization of regulatory information management systems. Just as our colleagues are coming in from around the world, I would invite you in the chat to please type your name, your position, your organization, and country. We'd love to see where you're from and who's with us today. Again, you're very welcome, and we look forward to starting shortly. As you're coming in, a warm welcome. You have reached the Pharmaceutical System Strengthening Learning series, identifying key enablers for digitization of regulatory information management systems. My name's Andrew Brown, and I have the pleasure of being your facilitator today. Well, we'll start in a minute or so, but we do note that people are coming across from other meetings. For those of you joining us again from yesterday, I'm glad we excited you enough to return. Those of you who didn't come yesterday, there will be a recording available. Yesterday, we discussed regulatory systems and their intersection between supply chain and also local manufacturing. Today, we're going to dig deep in the area of regulatory information management systems. And just as you're coming in, again, welcome. We'd encourage you to type your name, your position, your organization, as well as the country that you're coming from. Thank you so much. And at this point, I'd like to hand over to Alicia, who will tell us some of the administrative aspects of our call today. Thanks, Alicia.
Thanks, Andrew. Good morning, and good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Just some quick housekeeping. Please make sure that your microphone is muted during the presentation. And please enter questions into the chat box. We'll be monitoring the chat and referring to the questions during the Q&A portion. And please note that the session is being recorded and will be available after the webinar. One last point, there will be French interpretation available, so you can use the interpretation channel that you prefer by clicking on the 3 dots on your Zoom platform. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alicia. Yes, and if you go to the bottom of your page where those Zoom icons are, I'm sure you're all like expert Zoom wizards now, but if you choose the world icon, you can choose English or French. The other exciting feature in Zoom is reactions, and I'd like to encourage you to find that so you can tell us how you're feeling as you're going along using those. So we understand that national regulatory authorities are responsible for controlling the quality, safety, and efficacy of medicinal products within their national borders. However, we also know that NRAs in low and middle income countries face various constraints in fulfilling this primary function. Among other issues, their information management systems are often disparate, not interoperable, or in some cases, non-existent, partially implemented, or non-functional. The persistence of paper-based regulatory processes creates inefficient workflows, lacks transparency, and also perhaps opens up to mismanagement and vulnerability to corruption. Digitization is a key strategy for improving RIMS functionality, which is an essential aspect of strengthening regulatory systems. And this webinar today is helping us to discuss the importance of digitizing regulatory information systems. So if this is your passion, you're in the right place. And by the end of this discussion today, you will have heard a number of perspectives, and you'll leave with points of action so that you can go and further engage in strengthening this aspect of the pharmaceutical system. Next slide, please. What I'd like to do is just to set the context a little bit. Many on this call will be aware of this. For those from the Gambia who might be on the call, I've just chosen this because it was in the newspaper, but these types of issues can be from any country, including high-income countries. But we were all shocked when 66 children were thought to have died because of unsafe medicine. And one of the reasons unsafe medicines are available in the marketplace is because of weak regulatory systems in the countries where we live and where we serve as part of our work. And so this becomes a particular issue for us. Next slide, please. what we think is helpful is to think about regulatory systems in the context of the overall pharmaceutical systems pathway and its components. On the screen is a flow diagram, a road, if you like. And the top left is where particular molecules and technologies are discovered, and they are thought about in terms of new entities to enter the marketplace. But before they can do that, they have to go through a clinical trial. Once passing clinical trials and getting regulated for approval on the market, they can be manufactured. There needs to be registration, laboratory testing, and also market surveillance for both quality and safety. And this is the regulatory system, or the blue boxes on the top. As we move down, we talk about regulation in terms of lot release as batches enter countries and into organizations. We need to understand that financing must be available in order to make medicines available. But then we move on to supply chain, the green section, that quantification, procurement, and storage. But we're not there yet. We need to really also have systems of prescribing, dispensing, use, and pharmacovigilance. And the reason for that is we know that no product, no program, but we also need to know no quality product, then no health outcomes from that program. And one key aspect of that is the regulatory system. And one key part or pillar of a well-functioning regulatory system is the IT system, or the regulatory information management system that we'll be focusing on today. Next slide, please. What's particularly critical is how do we strengthen that system? Although this is not the main topic or thrust of today's discussion, I just wanted to point to you that the pharmaceutical system is a subset of the health system. It's a system that needs consideration with regard to its governance, its human resources, its services, its information systems, and financing. Today, we're going to talk about the information systems, the RIMS aspect. But unless these other aspects in the regulatory system and the pharmaceutical system more broadly are not addressed and strengthened as well, then we will not have products that are safe, efficacious, and of quality. Moreover, we're aiming to get that access, the accountability, availability, acceptability, affordability, all the abilities, and use. And again, this bigger picture helps to understand the complexity. Next slide, please. USAID is a critical player in the encouragement and the investment in strengthening pharmaceutical systems. And this particular diagram, again, notes the leaves of development that we need to engage in for medical products to be available. But also, you'll see on the outer edges, there are government entities, there are community entities, and also the providers. There is an ecosystem of stakeholders that need to be active and working well for our pharmaceutical systems and our regulatory systems as a subset of that to be working well. And it's in this complexity that we are excited to have our webinar today. This webinar is brought to you by MTaPS as a part of its end of a project 6 webinar series. MTaPS as a USAID program that's been strengthening pharmaceutical systems over the past 6 years in 15 countries of the world. We also have pleasure to have colleagues on our panel from CARE and from PQM+, WHO, and USAID. Next slide, please. So let's introduce those colleagues to you as we go on our journey together. But before we do, we just want to remind ourselves this little summary that I want you to take away, and that pharmaceuticals play that pivotal role in that healthcare delivery system. And again, one key message is, yep, no product, no program, but no quality product used appropriately, no improved health outcomes. And today's webinar on regulatory information systems is critical if we want that outcome to occur. Next slide, please. So we're excited to have panelists with us, and I would encourage the panelists to put on their cameras. I carefully combed my hair before coming on to this webinar to make sure I was looking well. And Alireza, excuse me.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us from WHO, the team lead for the regulatory systems there. Kyle Duarte, the Senior Director of Global Digital Solutions from CARE USAID. Please give a wave there. Suli, a pleasure to have you on another panel that I'm moderating, representing a Technical Director from the USAID promoting the Quality of Medicines Plus program, and Toby Bush, the Senior Pharmaceutical Management Advisor, Office of Health Systems, USAID. Thank you so much for your time today. And we're going to go on a flowing journey to unwrap this topic of the importance of regulatory information systems. And WHO is renowned for setting standards in this regard and the benchmarks of interactions. And what I'd like to do, Alireza, is to come to you and to ask you this question. Why we think of strong, when we think of strong functional regulatory systems, where do regulatory management information systems fit in? What's their role? I've given that bigger picture, but please bring in this aspect. Ali, thank you so much. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I hope that you can hear me well. Thank you, Andrew, for your nice introduction. Just to answer this question, I would like to structure basically my input based on WHO guideline on good regulatory practices. I'm sure that many of you are aware of this guideline. Just to let you know that the guideline is emphasizing on 9 high-level principles and also 8 enablers. So now if I look at these principles, I would like to emphasize that where the digitalization, automation, computerized system can contribute in improving these principles of good regulatory practices. For example, one of the good regulatory practices principle is about consistency in process and also in decision making. So when you computerize your system, when you computerize your regulatory activities, processes, definitely deviation from these processes is a bit more difficult, or I would say that the system is obliging you to stick to whatever has been computerized, automated, and then this is bringing further consistency in your process and also at the end, consistency in decision making, which is basically outcome of your activities. The other aspect of good regulatory practice that digitalization can affect this is the clarity. Basically, this is again another high principle, and digitalization, availability of information on digitalized platforms is bringing further improvements on clarity about the regulations, not only in giving access to them, but also these platforms helping in understanding better participation of variety of stakeholders in developing of the regulations, guidelines, etc. Their contribution to providing feedback to them, asking online questions, etc., which is also improving the clarity about it. But most importantly, also, I would like to mention about the 2 other principles that will be heavily affected by digitalization. One is the transparency, and the other one is the efficiency of the regulatory systems. So definitely availability of the information, perhaps through the digitalized platforms, which perhaps there is the only way that you can provide information to a wide range of audiences, is bringing transparency to your systems. Transparency on processes, transparency on the decisions, transparency on availability of the information that you would like to have. And this is another aspect of basically the digitalized platforms that helping basically the transparency. And this is one of very important, again, principles of good regulatory practice, which is known to everybody. The other aspect is efficiency. And when it is coming to the efficiency, basically the automated system, this is very well known that the automated system is basically helping you to perform the activities in a shorter time. It is also giving a variety of computerized tools, instruments to you that is helping you to access the information very quickly instead of, imagine, going to the archive to bring the document to the desk, opening it in front of you. And it is also bringing this possibility that several people that they can work on the same document at the same time. There are so many examples that I can provide here, but I just want to mention that perhaps the most important aspect of the digitalized system is to increase the efficiency of the system's regulatory activities. Now, going to the enablers. Among the enablers, again, I would like to mention about good governance. It already has been covered, and Andrew mentioned about that as part of the good governance, definitely it is helping the structures, the organizations to become more efficient, to provide information at the same time. But very importantly, this is also reducing the vulnerability to corruption, which is one of the problems in any governments, any systems, any public sectors, which is also not excluded from national regulatory authorities. The other aspect of this is the communication. And by communication, I mean inter-organization government and also intra-organization government among the authorities, among the different units that you have in your authority. So this facilitates the communication between the different stakeholders, either internal to the whole regulatory system or external to the regulatory system, the way that you will communicate with your stakeholders. Imagine the time that you have to write a letter, send it to a company to communicate with them. It is happening in no time nowadays, and this is improving the communication. One of the biggest challenges of all the regulatory authorities around the world is human resources. To any regulatory authority you go, the most advanced one, the least advanced one, you go, one of the challenges is human resources, availability of the human resources. And this is very well known that since we have the digitalized systems that are helping us to perform our activities, the computer-assisted variety of activities that we have, this is definitely is replacing basically the need to human resources, perhaps, or helping us to use our human resources in a more effective manner. I don't know what will be the future of this, because with the AI nowadays, perhaps we will not be so far to see that most of the regulatory activities even will be done by the computers in the future. I will not be surprised to see that. But I just want to mention that definitely it is a way that it is also reducing the demand to the human resources and putting them in another level of basically performance, perhaps focusing more on scientific aspects rather than administrative aspects. And this is bringing also some other level of efficiency to the regulatory systems. So in conclusion, and coming back to all these aspects, I would like to mention that at the end, applying the computerized tool, digitalized tool, these are the ways that at the end is bringing further efficiency, further efficacy to the systems, and basically improving the performance of the regulatory authorities. Over and thank you.
Ali, thank you so much. I'm sold. I want to buy one. But I need to better understand sort of aspects of this. So, Toby, you've been working across multiple investments from USAID perspective. What else would you like to add to this question?
So I don't know. I think maybe first, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, and thank you for having me here. I think maybe Ali Reza could just drop the mic, and there's no need for my answer. That was very well said and succinct, and you know, we like to align with WHO standards as well. I think the only things that I'll highlight, and this is nothing new, but you know, for us, it really is around that efficiency that Ali Reza talked about so well. And he talked about, corruption. And I think maybe even if we take a step back and look at security overall of the information and how we're managing it, the digitalization adds a important component to that. And then the last thing is that, you know, human resources, but also risk management, and that maybe aligns also with the security. I think one of the things that we're all pushing now is, you know, not just the data collection and facilitating that, but the use. And again, Ali Reza talked about that too. Having the data and the information and the records in this digital form also promotes use, collaboration among various stakeholders. And so I think that's also an important point that we see when it comes to digital regulatory systems.
Great. Thank you so much, Toby. And I think those extra points are of great importance to us. Suli, I'd like to come to your perspective now from the PQM Plus environment and your experience again across a number of countries. Can you just give us a high-level overview of the RIMS landscape as you see it from your project's perspective, particularly in LMICs?
Sure. Thank you, Andrew. So based on the information that we gather from sovereign countries before embarking into developing the guidelines specifically on the integrated regulatory information management system, right? The overall key point that we observed so far is there's multiple lack of understanding at different levels of the regulatory authorities in terms of how are to determine the regulatory and technical requirement for designing or developing a functional and applicable to the needs of the regulatory authority with respect to computerized or digitalized software application, I should say, right? And this because of the adoption of the RIMS in LMICs remains disproportionately low from that reason perspective. And the majority would have paper-based process, right, in their information management system. What it means, paper-based, it will take time. Ali already mentioned about this. You will need to have a very well-structured inventory if you would like to make the paper-based process functional and efficient, right? But nowadays, we are living in a digitalized world. So the effort from the regulatory authority in the majority of the LMICs have really targeted to move towards that computerized system, right? So doing so, what are the requirements these countries should understand? Of course, first thing, what the majority are lacking is the commitment from different key stakeholders within the context of information management system, sharing, retrieval in a timely manner makes sense to not only within the organization, but also makes sense to the other partners. For example, the disease program, the industry, right, who will submit the application for consideration of authorization and approval. And also beyond that, for those continents, for example, Africa, they have sovereign, regional economic community, right, that promote the reliance and harmonization. So without this type of computerized system in place in exchange of the regulatory information, the activities, this would be a challenge, right? Even within the RAC. And beyond that, Asia, for example, within the CERN, Southeast Asia Regional Network, within the ASEAN, for example, that's also another hub in terms of how this digitalization can fit in. At this moment, different countries are in different level in terms of adapting the digitalized or computerized RIM. So that's the high level of the view that we observed so far. And also just would like to point out the limited understanding or foresee what are the gains, right, to get from the computerized system. So I think that we need some educational, perspective from donors community, from the WHO, from the technical assistance agency like ourselves, MTaPS, PQM+, etc., that are really keen in providing this kind of technical assistance to the countries, right? So I just would like to point out also the gap at this moment is really the transparency aspect within the organization itself. It's already emphasized by Ali Raisa on this, right? So for example, we just visited a few countries, right, last month. When we go to ask the market authorization registration division, yes, they have the file, tons of, files in the room. And then when we ask, has one of these registered or in the process of review, there's tons of backlogs as well in there, right? Communicated with the inspection team, for example, with the post-marketing surveillance team or market control in general, right? For the import. And also how you communicate or feed in the pharmacovigilance reporting to the registration. Here is the trail of papers, for example. Some is well organized, but the majority cannot be traceable, right? What happened? So these are the kind of key gaps in the LMIC, which I would like to really every one of us to think about this and then come together, making sure that we are, handling this collectively and make sure that we move forward to the next step for transparency, consistency, and timely access and retrieval of the regulatory information system. Thank you.
Sully. Yeah, thank you so much. And I've got this vision of this great mound of paper for each of our sort of regulatory dossiers. So we'll come back to that. But Kyle, from your perspective in care, you have a different range of countries you're engaging with. What would you like to add to what Sully's mentioned already?
Thank you. First, thank you for having me. Hello, everyone. I think I've been working in this space for almost 20 years, and even in prior lives before care, there's been, as my previous panelists have talked about, a different maturity level across the world on capacity for different countries to manage their regulatory information management systems. I'd like to call out most recently a report by the World Bank that showed, I think, just about a third of countries in Africa and the AU had a fully functioning regulatory information management system. And by this, we mean, all the 7 main functions of that: market authorization, licensing, import-export controls, GMP, distribution channels, and others. As Ali Reza pointed out, it's really more than just information management. It's really fully integrated. I'd also like to just take a step back, and while we look at the capabilities through a World Bank report or a benchmarking tool, often these fall under a country's digital capability. The UNDP, WHO, USAID, Gates have done tremendous work on looking at maturity levels of different digital functions within a Ministry of Health, within a system strengthening perspective. And it's really important to look at that from a holistic view to enable complete system strengthening, because regulatory management information, as you pointed out, Andrew, earlier on, overlaps considerably with supply chain. It overlaps with clinical trials. It overlaps with quality assurance. And so when we look at, RIMS from an LMIC, there's a lot of information out there that shows maturity levels, indicators that are using in Asia, in Africa, in Central America, in Central Europe, that really help understand all the moving components that are necessary to make this a successful and sustainable intervention. Thank you.
Yeah, no, great. And we're going to come back to the enabling environment shortly in our discussion because that's key. Before we go there, I just want us to go a bit deeper, help us have a bit more of a visualization about why digitalization needs to be pursued. So, Toby, if I can come back to you, we've discussed the role of RIMS in medicines regulation, the range of status, the reasons why that's important. And let's just focus on the digitization aspect just for a little bit. So we've already heard a fantastic, we should have recorded it as an advocacy video from Ali Reza, why we should have these systems. But let's just, for those of us who don't see these day to day, what are some of the key drawbacks of paper-based systems and how do digital systems address them? And I would encourage you, if you can be specific, give me a visualization here of what a particular worker in one of these NRAs might be confronted with as you answer that question. Thanks, Toby.
Sure, thank you. And I too wished we had audio taped that response. I think more so just because it would sort of limit the need for me to speak actually right now. I think the digitalization of RIMS sort of takes all of the reasons, those principles that Ali Reza mentioned, and sort of reinforces the advantages of having digitalization. It sort of puts another layer on the importance of that. You know, and some of the ones that he spoke to, you know, were the efficiency, and you know, the improvement for, or the help for human resources. And I think, you know, going from a paper-based form to digital forms or to electronic forms continues to build on those you know, enablers and principles. To visualize, I wish I had been able to, you know, draw something for you, Andrew, in advance. But, you know, I think we're all familiar with those, you know, ledgers that are however thick, without however many pages, that are, you know, however long, with columns and rows. And of course, we can understand that the transcription between those types of ledgers and books is just sort of an opportunity to introduce errors and other issues of quality into the management of information. But I think the other pieces, and something that I noted earlier, was the use. And I think that also just really limits the use of what we can do with the information that we're collecting. Again, really inefficient processes that sort of don't enable good collection, but also good use and collaboration with that information.
Great, thanks, Toby. And Alireza, I want to bring you back in. You've nearly answered this question earlier on, but I'd like to come back to it, because for those of us who this topic is perhaps a little bit new, we might not understand some of the real drudgery that's involved in paper-based systems. And I'd like to ask if you just give us a couple of examples of the drawbacks of paper-based systems, and then how these digital systems address them. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, I don't think that the question here is that why we need the digitalized systems. I think we are now living in an era that, I mean, even every kid is so much dependent to this digitalized system. You buy a refrigerator, it is using computerized system, it is using kind of intelligent behind. You buy a washing machine, your car, your mobiles, everything. I mean, TVs, whatever. You look around yourself, you will see that how this type of systems are coming to us. And then also, I'm very excited these days, let's say, with the also artificial intelligence, that how it also can affect our life, and also by life I mean also the way that we are working, etc. I know I can explain that, yes, the problem is that we don't have resources, we don't have enough. I mean, the regulatory authorities perhaps they don't have enough money to invest. The people are not also perhaps very much oriented about what they have to do, etc., etc., etc. Variety of things. But I don't think that the issue is that we don't know what is the added value. I think everybody knows very well what is the added value and how this computerized system digitalization can help us. The barrier for me that I see here is, I mean, at least I can mention about 2-3 of them. There are many, but I think that one of the, I mean, based on our interaction with many of the regulatory authorities, one of the aspects is that there is a lack of vision, there is a lack of policy, there is a lack of strategic priorities in this area. Perhaps this is one of the issues that I see. The regulatory authorities are not bringing this into their strategic planning, that yes, this is what we have to go for in the future, etc., etc., etc. I can understand that they are actually dealing with many other important aspects, but this I barely see that in the strategic directions of a regulatory authority, they are considering the digitalization. So for me, this is one aspect. The other also aspect that I see is that I'm not talking about all the regulatory systems, but in several systems that are also, this is important to know that we I mean, digitalized systems are not going to make a miracle for us unless you do not have established systems. First, you need to have a process. First, you need to have, imagine that you don't have a guideline, you don't have the proper SOPs to perform your registration process. How you want to digitalize it? So first step is that you establish the system, you address it through the different instruments, either it is on the paper or whatever, and then you can digitalize it. Because also I have seen that some regulatory authorities, they purchase a system and then the system is not adapted to their need, and they have difficulties in using them. So perhaps this is what I can answer for the time being. Over.
Yeah, I think so. It's not a question of should digitization take place. That should be the assumption. And then the next part is, well, what do we need as the prerequisites in order to move to digitization? And you said very clearly that we need a strategic direction, we need that overarching governance, plus also that systems need to be in place. So Suli, can I bring you in here again, from your experience of digitizing systems, what are perhaps two other prerequisites that NRAs need to have in their environment for digitization to occur effectively? Thanks, Suli.
Yeah, that's a great question. As I mentioned, and other speakers also mentioned earlier, the key factor for digitalization is really a commitment, right? To make sure that everyone is on the same page with respect to the specification requirements and how we start. That's very critical, meaning digitalization does not happen overnight, right? A plan specifically incrementally to be taken place. That's very critical. For example, okay, I have tons of backlog on the application to review. Let's focus on market authorization registration, for example. Once that's done, and this also in the process has to be in phase-by-phase basis. For example, the newly apply, product, for example, that come to the country, that can be a top priority and prioritize to those manufacturers or applicants that come forward. Oh, I'm very keen to have this digitalized submission, for example, right? Because I aim to export also with other countries on CTD format, Common Technical Document Dossier, for example. That's one. And then you gradually to add another one that need to renew, for example, the application into the system. Once you have this, then a consideration might be the licensings, right? That can be another regulatory function, and then go to the regulatory inspection, PV, pharmacovigilance, and laboratory that connect to this. So it's a kind of a journey that need to be consideration in that. So these are the kind of additional things that prerequisite for getting this done. Thank you.
And what I liked about your answer, Suli, is that sort of incremental nature of introducing systems, digital systems, but also one of the key messages I heard from you is that interaction with other partners, particularly private sector, as part of that journey. Kyle, again, from care perspective, what would you like to add here? And are there any particular things outside of the control of NRAs that need to be in place for digital systems to work properly here? Sorry, Kyle, you're just muted still at this time.
Apologies for that. Thank you. I'd like to just echo and build upon what Suli said in addition to this. So, in digitalization, I think there are, I would say, 6 larger buckets. People, we've talked about capacity, processes, standardizing processes. I think Toby and others mentioned that, whether it is market authorization or licensing or any of those functions. Data. Any digitalization is really foundation to having good quality data. Oftentimes we see that, there's a heavy backlog of paper-based systems or master data management that's really not up to speed. So without really addressing that, it's not going to be completely successful. And then the fourth pillar would be infrastructure. You do need investments in internet, computers, other technology aspects to make this successful. I'd like to overlay that with is commonly change management. it's really a big step to go from manual processes to automation and digitalization. And change management means very different things for very different actors through the system. You talked about the private sector. When we go into digitalizing market authorization, you could imagine the first step initially would be bringing physical documentation to the NMRA's office. But if you task shift the entry into an online form, that's change management at the end at the private sector. Pharmaceutical companies, distributors then change how they interact, change how they work in using web-based tools to begin processes. That change management extends into governance across processes to keep things moving smoothly. And so looking at all of those really makes this successful. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. And I think we've just had an overall course in about 5 minutes of digitizing systems 101. Toby, USAID has been making millions of dollars of investments in these systems. And what have you learned about what's needed for success for digitizing NRAs? What else would you like to add?
So I'm gonna put a plug in here for the digital the common standards that I think we're gonna get into, making sure that we're all starting at the same place, and I think that's really important for interoperability. And we all have invested a lot, including USAID, in systems that tend to be a little bit of maybe disparate and off the cuff and for one function or one particular area. And I think it's really important for all of our investments to make sure that those systems can talk to each other in one way or another. And the last thing that I'll say is, and sort of piggybacking on what others have said, is that sort of political will, political backing, and recognizing that this is a marathon and not definitely not a sprint. And so some of that patience, which is hard to garner, that political will or will period over long periods of time.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And digitization, obviously, we've got to go there. Ali Reza has told us, there's no question. We've got to get on with it. And governance is a key part. The finance is a part. There's this change management aspect, the people, all these things together. And it sounds like that overall strategic approach that Ali Reza was talking about is that a process that can pull that together when thought through carefully. So thank you so much for that. Hey, everyone, guess what? We've been going for about 45 minutes. This is where your computer will beep at you to move a little bit. So I'd like to invite you to move around a little bit, just to get yourself moving, get that crink in your neck. Think about that question that you wanted to ask, to type in the chat, and just relax a moment. So we're about halfway. We've got a few more questions to ask our panelists, particularly going on to standards. And then we're going to come to question time. Now, question time is where you as our audience have the chance to quiz our illustrious panel. So please start thinking about your questions, and please type them in the chat. Thank you to Mohammed and to Nureya, who have already put their questions there. So please think about those questions as we move along. Suli, I need to see your beautiful face once again. Please come back to us. Hopefully you weren't scared by the question I'm going to ask you, but as Toby was meaning, you were working with quite an international group, including colleagues from MTaPS, WHO, and others, to look at some identifying minimum common standards for RIMS, these global standards. Do you want to tell us a bit about that work? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity, Andrew, and the audiences. I believe among the audience here, regulatory authority representative, participating in here, took part in the initial phase that we, MTaP and PQM Plus, came together and conduct a series of consultation with the experts, including those that participating in this, webinar today, and several countries representative both in Africa, in Asia, that provide input to the work that we are trying to achieve, right? WHO also part of that, and many other international organizations came forward, expressed their interest to provide input, and thought about what are going to be those data standards or minimum common standards that should be identified and prioritized to help the regulatory authority in LMICs to consider as the minimum set of data standard for different, objective in terms of getting the computerized system in place, right? So we came up with setting the criteria. These include the relevance. Relevance in this case, for example, at least one of the 8 core regulatory functions as defined by the WHO GPT is relevant to that, right? 1 or 2 or more that even be a universal, right? That can apply to different regulatory functions, right, in nature. And then the third is the feasibility, meaning based on the limited resource of the regulatory authority in a particular country or region, then what would be the first step? What are the data standards that need to consider to put into the system, the RIMS system, right? That allow adoption and implementation incrementally, as I mentioned. And the criticality aspect is also another criteria that we put into it. The country gains against the risk that they can face. For example, it's kind of balance, right? Balance and between benefits and risk. Look into that perspective. So the 3 category of the data standard that we have identified, classified under the process standards, data dictionary and knowledge trees, and the last is data exchange standards, right? So I will go into each of these buckets, right? For example, the process standard, everyone in this call, I believe, would know, for example, good manufacturing practices, right? That's a set of requirements for the manufacturers to comply with, for example, right? Good laboratory practices for the operation of the laboratory, for example. And ISO 17025, for example, that's a norm, international standard for laboratory to achieve. And good practice for pharmaceutical, review practices, for example, that Ali has mentioned. So these are the process standards that help us to put the regulatory process more efficient and effective. Now, is that enough? No. You need to have the dictionary and the knowledge tree that help you to standardize. What you mean, for example, a chemical name of a product, for example, a substance, then you have to use either the international, non-proprietary name, for example, or INN, that across the world, right, led by WHO, for example, to come up with this INN. So many years back, right, when we talk about, say, acetaminophen, what does it mean? That's the INN. Every country would say the same and recognize that, right? And many other, dictionaries should be aligned in that. And the third is the data exchange standard. That's really kind of a standard that has to be considered a prerequisite to put into the computerized or electronic, application perspective. For example, the PDF, right, portable document format, for example, or CTD, I mentioned earlier, the common technical document, and so forth. So on these 3 should come together and prioritize accordingly. Among those 3 buckets, so far we identify 56 on together. But whether on 56 wouldn't be feasible or applicable to the LMICs and I? Probably not. Let's prioritize those 56 to a more manageable, right? And we successfully, with the input from experts and the countries, reduce that number or prioritize to only 36. So that's one of the minimum common standards that need to be considered and implement in phase basis. So that is the process I capture. And also the good news is the resource is available, right, for adopting minimum common standards for the RIMS system. The pathway to digitalization is also resource available there, and we will be happy to share. And perhaps, our colleague Lauren will, share the link there so that you can find, and that will help you to consider how to take the journey forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Suli. And Lauren has dropped that in the chat, which is great. This sounds like a fantastic body of work. It sounds like many people from many countries has been involved. I can see that Alireza is getting super excited about this document. I'm going to change up your question, so watch out. So my question is, how do you think these standards are going to accelerate digitization? Let's just move this on a little bit. So, I mean, WHO has been involved in this. I can see you're excited by this work. How do you think this is going to accelerate digitization? How are these standards going to be useful? Thanks, Alireza.
Yeah, you're welcome, and thank you. I enjoyed a lot basically during this discussion and the input from Suli, which was very comprehensive regarding the standard. But also, I think that this is the appetite that we see these days in terms of building on regulatory systems, and perhaps we didn't have this level of attention and investment that we are seeing in the recent years in the past. So I think that this is one of the main drives that, yes, countries, the regular health systems, they realize that how much it is important to invest and also expand the regulatory capacity. So itself, I think this is the main drive behind that, that there is a commitment from the countries. And definitely when you want to expand on that, the importance of computerized systems is also part of this journey. So I think there is a good momentum basically that to bring it to the attention of the decision makers, and also there are variety of attempts coming with the new guidelines, new standards that how the countries can, and variety of advocacy. This seminar is one of them, the previous ones that you had also. These are the ways that we are also advocating on the importance of this digitalized systems and how they can actually improve the efficiency and the performance of the regulatory system. So I think this is the main drive that is behind. But also, in addition to that, the variety of partners that are active in this area, they are also supporting countries in developing these systems and also implementing these systems. And one of my basically inputs here is that when we are developing this for one specific country, also we have to consider that similar systems with some minor adjustments can also be used in other countries. And perhaps we have to use we as developing partners also, we have to consider that when we are supporting one member state, one country, one specific area, how the same system can be used in other countries and avoiding duplication. Definitely some adjustments is needed, but this is also something that can help the others. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So it's that maintaining that sovereignty, but also building off experience of others and getting that interconnectivity for things like harmonization and reliance that we've been talking about. Super exciting. Kyle, can I come to you? Where do you see these standards are going to sort of make a difference in the progress towards digitization?
Thanks. That's a really very good question. I think there is a coordinated global effort across all the multilateral donors and countries to really work on standards and common standards, specifically for regulatory information management systems, but this also extends into the broader health system strengthening environment. We talked about CTDs and RIMS. Earlier on, Toby, and I think you mentioned the overlapping importance of RIMS with supply chain. We're looking at common standards with GS1 for product identification. So in track and trace for, addressing quality assurance or counterfeits, the common standards are being worked on there. When we look into active surveillance, when we go onto the health sides, it's the FHIR standards that are being adopted across all the different open source public health systems that are being developed. This aligns with USAID's digital strategy. This aligns with WHO, World Bank, where there is a real coordinated effort to work with common standards across systems that are using the same data dictionaries and libraries across that. I think Ali Reza just also mentioned that this is needed to lift all boats, and because of the interdependencies. And so we see this in countries with strong digital governance enforcing these standards to make all these systems interoperable. A long-winded way to say that, the RIMS standards is really essential to make this scalable, not duplicate systems, to share information across different countries. You talked about that being one of the most critical components of this. And so this coordinated push to use standards, RIMS, FIRE, GS1, others are really going to make the investments in this really sustainable. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And I think one of the subtleties that you were speaking about there is that Suli was mentioning the data standards for the RIMS themselves, but you've also mentioned a couple other groups of global standards. So the FIRE standards, which are the standards for different pieces of software to talk together. The GS1 standards, which is a digital standard for products to move right through the system. And I think this is an exciting time of really improved momentum and increased energy and speed towards digitization. Toby, maybe I'm being a little bit too enthusiastic here. What do you see as how these standards are going to sort of accelerate or help with digitization from a
So
perspective?
I'm gonna pick up on two words that Kyle used, and that is the sustainability and scalability. And I think that that's really important if we do have that sort of standard backbone or common sort of foundation or common components of these systems, the ability for them to interact and to communicate with each other, which I think is really important, is there. And once we have that sort of, I think that allows those systems, like Kyle said, to be scalable. And that, of course, increases the possibility for sustainability. And the last thing I'll say is also, I think, as I said earlier, this idea that we all sort of want the quick wins and the easy, like low-hanging fruit or whatever we're calling it, but recognizing that this really is a longer term process. Those data standards, for example, for GS1, I've seen that take a really long time to establish and really be necessary foundationally for these systems to be able to work. So yeah.
So thank you for tempering my enthusiasm. Be prepared for some time for this to take place. Alireza, I think you have another point you'd like to add to this before we go to question time.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think this is also to build on whatever we heard from the other panelists. This is also an approach towards globalization of health, regulation, etc. And if we don't have a proper standard, basically it is limiting us to have a common language to communicate between each other. I'm giving you an example. If imagine that we are using different classification for safety related issues, pharmacovigilance related issues. The overall aspect is that we collect all this information at global level to analyze them at global level and also provide feedback to everybody, to all the countries, to all the health-related institutions, etc., etc. So if we don't properly standardize them, then basically we are lacking a common language to communicate to each other. And this is very important. This is bringing another important aspect that basically this is a must. Otherwise you cannot. And Toby mentioned something extremely important in his first point. Through digitalization, we are generating a lot of data, but not necessarily a lot of information, not necessarily proper analysis that we can use later on to bring an impact to the regulated market. And this is perhaps again another aspect, that when you have a common language, common standard, that you are developing basically same data that can be analyzed in the same way, definitely it is helping us also to have a better impact on the market. Over.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to give you a big love heart there, Alireza, because that was a fantastic closing comment to this discussion. And I'd like to encourage all of our participants to choose a reaction from the reactions tab at the bottom to celebrate our discussion so far. And at this point, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Dean. There's been some great activity in the chat, and Dean is our Senior Principal Technical Advisor for Information Systems, and he's going to now chair our question time. You've got 25 minutes. I'll give you 5 minutes notice when we're nearing the end. Have fun, Dean. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. You know, that was one of the most fascinating hours I've listened to for a very, very long time. And I'd like to thank the panelists, Alireza, Suli, Kyle, and Toby for their fantastic insights. You know, I've had the pleasure of working with them, many of them, for many, many years now. Kyle, I think we go back 15 years in supply chain activities all throughout the world. So fascinating conversation. You know, I personally have worked at the coalface for many years in building software tools for LMICs in sort of the supply chain space, of which regulatory systems is now a key part of it. And one of the key things I've always struggled with is a common understanding of data. So I'd just like to thank everybody involved in the common standards and Toby for helping push on this. You know, the common standards are a critical part of any kind of interoperability. You've got to talk the same language. You know, technology is not a hindrance to interoperability. Understanding what we're all talking about, that's the problem. You know, Alireza mentioned it as well. You know, it's about taking that data we have and converting it into information, and this is a key part of it. So with all of that, I'd also just like to mention that you know, we've spent a lot of time considering a lot of what's been happening on the you know, the digitalization of software in the regulatory space. And you know, we also have a tool called Open RIMS at MTaPS that is a tool that's put all of these ideas together of a lot of what the panelists have spoken about. So with that, I'm just going to leave it now and ask ask for some of the questions for the panelists. So one of the first questions we got was from Mohammed Asif Yari. And he mentioned that, you know, one of the challenges is local capacity, and most of the efforts are spent in reviewing registration documents. And in some cases, the product is already registered in some WHO countries listed or SRA. Lack of reliance and harmonization are key challenges, and how could we possibly overcome them, especially in the low to middle income countries? And I think he mentions Afghanistan. So probably I'll ask Alireza to perhaps answer that question first, and then I'll open it to everybody else in the panel who has an opinion. Alireza.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, I mean, I think I repeat a little bit what I mentioned at the beginning. You need to establish a system first. You need to have a proper strategic plan, how you want to establish your system. And this is very much required to have a vision, basically, and where this digitalization, computerization is going to be part of your strategies and also helping you to establish the system. My point here is that unless you are not putting any efforts to establish the system, you cannot think like that you are buying a software or whatever and you bring it to your agency and all your problems is solved. So that is part of the issue. So first, and this is a stepwise approach. Limited resources everywhere, and this is basically what you need to think about. First, what I have to do. Second, what I have to do. So without having a proper system in place, digitalization perhaps is a little bit too early, in my opinion, and also may be a kind of investment that you may need to repeat it again and also adjust it again. So I think the first approach should be to think properly about, especially I'm talking about the countries that there is like maturity, we are talking about maturity level 1 regulatory systems, that there are not all the elements of the system in place, and that is making it difficult. And that is why for us, it is very important for these countries to use and embed the reliance approaches in their regulatory activities for the time being. And this is the way that they can also benefit from the work of the others. And how now the digitalized system can help them is that basically those countries that they would like to be relied, or the one that are like considered SRAs, double listed authorities, etc., etc. This is a must for them to be able to share their information with the others, or to share their regulatory decisions with the others. Otherwise, it is not going to have a proper impact in this world. And this is perhaps something that the way that I see the landscape is that what we are discussing today, perhaps in another 3, 4, 5 years, we see a major change in this area, and we will be able to see more and more aspects of digitalization in variety of works. I also would like to come back to another point. Regulatory authorities are not independent, separate islands in their countries. They are part of the government, they are part of the system. And it is not only up to them that, okay, I decide tomorrow to digitalize everything, etc., etc. This will not work, basically, unless there is a decision at higher level, at the government level. So this is a little bit also, I have to say, linked to the overall, let's say, government approaches in digitalization. I don't want to sound pessimistic in this area, but it is also a reality. Unless there is an investment by the government on the infrastructure, especially, this will not be working. We are still having countries that internet is still an issue. So if you are not addressing the problem related to the related to internet, for example, and the penetration of this internet into all the corners of the country, that would be difficult to go for that aspect. So these limitations also affecting perhaps the aspects and the work that and the kind of investment that the regulatory authorities are going to have in the future. Over.
Thanks very much, Alireza. I don't know if anyone has a further comment. Suli?
Yeah, thank you, Dean. Just an additional consideration there with the limitation of the NIA in low and middle income country, right? For example, a very specific, observation that we had in one of our country that we support. When the adoption of the computerized system for receiving, right, the application from the applicant, the internet connection has not been stable, for example, then, when the system is not really well designed to cope with this stability or instability, I should say, of the internet connection, discourage the applicant to give up as well. For example, during the submission, right, it comes to the regulatory authority, and then where it go? It go to the iCloud, or it go to the inside or in-house a server of the authority, which the majority are very limited, right? Then the application just stop there, right? So that's one thing to consider. Make sure the server, the internet access, the capacity is also adequate enough to receive the application. Second point, the majority of the system exists at this moment that adopted by some SIAs and also maturity level 3 or 4 has some limitation in terms of at one time, how many applications can be received, for example, 100, 200? When these simultaneously or concurrently occur in the submission at the same time, the system can crash, right? Because that ability to accept the numbers, high quantity of the application has not been considered in the system. So that's another consideration to be made by the agency as well as the service provider, etc. So that's also a system, the health system itself, right? Specifically for those that rely on the Ministry of Health server, for example. Over.
Thanks, Suli. I think scalability is a vital part of what we're talking about here. We have to make sure what we do is scalable in the scenario that includes human resources and everything else included. I don't know if there are any further responses to that question, or shall we move on to the next question? Okay, let's have a look at the next question. What are the optimal approaches to ensure the sustainability of digital systems, considering the significant investments required for their setup? And I think, we've already spoken a little bit about it, Suli. So I don't know if anyone else would like to add anything to that. Maybe Kyle, you'd like to mention something here? I know you've been working on a lot of that.
I think that's a really important question, and I think the answer could be really long, so I'll try and really summarize this. We've talked a lot about foundational elements to make investments in digital systems and digital technology successful. I think here we need to kind of understand first to have the vision, the roadmap, and a strategy. Second, we need to understand that digital systems are not in isolation. They're part of health system strengthening. They're part of governments. They're part of ministries. We need to look at, all the foundational elements, capacity of people, standardizations of process, data, infrastructure, as mentioned before. But lastly, I think things that we have seen that are really successful with open source systems in the public health ecosystem is really building a community around common standards, building systems that are modular. I think it's really important not to have one system that can do everything, but leverage standards, open source technologies, that different things can be added on, interoperable, or exchange data with. As we look at regulatory information management systems, there are so many different complexities and core functionalities, but with strong governance, I think this can really look at sustainable and scalable approaches to making this successful. I'd also need to kind of connect back with what Toby said. Scalability and sustainability is a marathon. It's not going to happen overnight. I think when we look at investments in this, we really need to look at it with a total cost of ownership. And that's not the cost of technology, it's not the cost of infrastructure, but it's the cost of people, processes, governance, continued efforts to build on quality data, to make inferences, to make reports, to really make these successful. There have been some really good examples of this in the public health ecosystem. We look at DHIS2, we look at OpenMRS. These are some of the really common open source platforms that have built a community that have scaled to hundreds of countries. And I think this journey with RIMS is just started. I think if we go back to DHIS2, that's more than 20 years ago where significant investments were made. And so with this continued push, I think this is going to be as successful, knowing we have all the people on this call working very hard to make that successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. I think one of the key things that you mentioned there as well is that, not one system needs to do everything. The common standards allow the systems to talk to each other. As I said, technology is not a hindrance to this. Are we all talking the same language? Are we all talking about the same thing when we get to the point of developing systems? So thank you very much for that. I don't know if there's any further comment on that question. Alireza?
Yeah, thank you. I think just to reflect on what has been discussed already, also want to mention that, I would like to come back again to the strategy and the stepwise approach. This is very important that we look at the overall digitalization of a system like a puzzle, that we are putting these different pieces. Definitely, it is very difficult, especially for low middle income countries, to fully digitalize the whole system in one night. So this is like going piece by piece and putting these pieces of puzzles together. So this is also coming back to the technology. For example, if you use the same platform for all these applications, digitalized systems, it is affecting the cost and also at the same time the sustainability of the system. So this is the aspect that in designing the whole system, this is very important also to consider the elements of sustainability in the future, technology-wise, and also the way that we are developing the system. Again, if you use the same platform, for example, same type of softwares that is also usable on the same system, then this is reducing your cost. Definitely, it is also affecting the sustainability. The other aspect of it is also that I have seen it based on, again, our benchmarking the variety of countries. This is very important to engage with the, let's say, domestic, local third parties. Very few NRAs I have seen in my life that they establish the system themselves, or they develop the system themselves, basically. They are dealing with the third parties that is providing the technology, to provide the application softwares, etc., etc. In several cases, I have seen that they are going to very good companies, perhaps outside their countries. They invest a lot, etc. And then on the way and in continuation of this work, it is very difficult to maintain them, because every time they have to go back to those people that are not, around themselves. So I think that this is very important. Any engagement, it is even you may use those type of companies, third parties, but also it is important, even for our partners, I would like to say that it's important to have somebody nearby, next door perhaps, and also to some extent using these local service providers, that they can also at least solve majority of problems, the small problems, if this is the case. So this using of local providers is also quite important, in my opinion. Over. Thank you,
Alireza. Thanks for that. I'm going to move on now to the next question. We've quite a few questions to go through, and I want to bring up a question from Linda Beth, and I think, Toby, this is probably for you. Given the interconnectedness of regulatory agencies and many other national and international functions, from manufacturers, customs agencies, MOH, and supply chains, is there a conversation around data use sharing as well as digital roles and responsibilities between these agencies? Oh.
So I'm going to, thank you, Linda Beth, and I'm going to answer partly, and then I'm probably going to punt this to talk a little bit, or maybe to see if there are others on the panel that have answers to this, because I think this goes beyond the sort of setting up of the systems, and they're talking to each other and the common RIMS, or the common standards for RIMS, and more on the use of data. But one thing that I did want to say, and as we're talking here, is I think it's important also to remember that these systems are tools, or they're systems of tools, and as others have said, is the sort of the people, the money, the political backing, the resources behind these mean that they are not silver bullets, and the creation or the investment in a regulatory information management system in and of itself is not going to solve all of the problems that exist within our regulatory systems, or that we're trying to accomplish with these digital systems. So I think that's important to remember, and as planning and strategies and roadmaps, as others have alluded to, as those are developed and sort of addressed, that is an important consideration as part of these. I think we sort of get to jump to put systems in place, or to make the investments to put systems in place, without sort of the larger picture there. So I don't know if that necessarily really addresses all of Linda Beth's question. I'm looking for it here now in the chat, and actually don't see
Perhaps.
it.
Yeah.
But yeah, Suli, I'm not sure if you have some experience around, oh, here we are, the data use and sharing between the different entities and stakeholders within the regulatory system and its touch points.
Yeah, thanks. I don't know if anyone else has any inputs there. We can perhaps move on to the next question. We've got a question from Amos. If 67% of African countries are not yet digitalized, how long would it take to reach the goal of automation of the rest of the African countries in digitalization? That's quite a difficult question to answer. It's how long is a piece of string in many ways. It depends on the appetite with each country and how each country is going to go about it. But I don't know if anybody on the panel would like to offer an opinion or their experience. Yes, Suli?
Yeah, I just would like to weigh in from our observation perspective. Maybe, the way that we should consider is looking from the sub-regional or regional before we go to specific country, right? Because it's cost associated to it. It's a long journey to get these RIMS in place. And also the commitment, stability also of the country in terms of the change of the government, the head of the agency, Ministry of Health, etc. All these are moving puzzles that need to be in place before this can be done. So, for example, an open source that started for, say, one rack in Africa, it can be SADC, it can be EAC, it can be IGET, for example, or Francophone countries in the West. Start with an open source and then see among the members within that rack to assess what is the interoperability open to the other racks, and what are the kind of limitations that collectively need to be addressed for that rack to agree on and move forward. So maybe start from that. I think that one can, scalable to the other rack to learn from, rather than every country start where they want. Thank you.
Thank you, Suli. In the interest of time, I'm also going to move on to the next question. It's from Elizabeth, and this is, how about the role of CIP, Coalition of Interested Parties, and their role in ensuring that every party doesn't create a different digitalized system for the various pharmaceutical systems? I know, Alireza, you mentioned something about that earlier, and perhaps you'd like to, you spoke a lot about, not duplicating systems, having one system we can share across multiple countries. So maybe you'd like to just briefly mention your thoughts on that.
Yeah, just very briefly. I mean, CIP is a mechanism to harmonize and also inform the different partners what they are doing and how they are also developing, and what are the tools that basically they are developing. So that mechanism so far is working quite well. I think that especially when it is coming to at global level and also at country levels, we have been able to establish a proper communication mechanism among the partners that are working at the country level. So that is what we are expecting, and we hope that also partners are collaborating better with each other also. And this is a mechanism that we established to bring further efficiency to the system, synergy to the way that we are working, and also avoiding duplication basically and overlaps. And I think this is at least the way that we are trying to communicate and establish communication among the partners to not to develop the same tools or whatever for the same countries. And I think that is the mechanism that already established. But also I have to say that there are some limitations, because partners are also obliged and also engage on their individual actually agreements with the countries, and sometimes they are obliged to respond basically to the need that is coming from the country, but at least the mechanism is there. We are not expecting that it is going to solve 100% of the problems, and there will be a utopia that is working properly, but definitely it is reducing the duplication. I also would like, if you give me 1 minute, to reflect on the other question that we had about the percentage of the countries in Africa that they are still not able to properly invest on digitalization. I would like to answer this question with another question. Are we expecting all of them to reach to the same level of digitalization or development? And definitely the answer is no, at least for near future. And this is why we are promoting Reliance. There are several countries that are more advanced than others. In kind of estimation, I would say that there are like 10, 12 countries that in near future, they are reaching to this maturity level 3, and perhaps they are more eligible to be supported and also to invest on their digitalized systems. For me, also the future, very important future in this area is AMA, African Medicine Agency, that should be supported by all the partners also, because they are going to play a very important role and perhaps to be reference and relied by almost all the countries in Africa, and perhaps this is the direction that we have to go over.
Thank you, Andrew. I'll hand it to you now. Yes, AMA is a very crucial part of all of this, and we're working very closely with them to ensure that continuity and level of digitalization across countries works. Andrew, I see your face. I'm assuming you're going to be taking over from me right now. Thank you to the panelists for answering the questions, and thank you for all the questions coming in. That's much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dean, and some exciting questions, and great to be engaged in that way. And I would just encourage the panelists just to have a look at the last couple of questions there that we didn't get to see if you could put some answers in the chat just as we go through closing remarks. That'd be much appreciated. So please join with me to choose a reaction. We want to thank Dean. Dean, I'm going to give you a bit of a thumbs up. Thank you so much for that. It's very interesting to get the questions and perspectives from our participants and to hear from our panelists. So thank you all for that. Wow, what a journey. Can't believe we've been here for like nearly 90 minutes. So we started out sort of wanting to discuss the importance of digitized regulatory information systems. And the quick recap is that we understood where these regulatory information systems fit. We've got a health system, we've got a pharmaceutical system, we've got a regulatory system, and we understand that these regulatory information systems are really crucial in there. We understood that the landscape is varied. We heard at the end that Ali Reza was saying, you know, not all countries are going to get to the excellent systems. Where are we going to invest? How are we going to use reliance and harmonization to help share the burden? And again, patience at the end. How are we improving that quality of medicines in the best way quality with our investments? It's not about why should we pursue digitalization. It's let's get on with it. And let's pursue digitalization. And what are the particular elements we need? We heard about governance. We heard about strategy. We heard about getting our systems in place. We heard about the importance of standards and the great work that's been done in that regard. We heard about the role that we can all play in different ways as we move along together in this partnership for improving digitization of regulatory systems. Why? Because we want those regulatory information, those regulatory NRAs to be more efficient, to be more transparent, and to really improve the number of quality medicines they're making available. Don't forget, no product, no program, but no quality medicine, no improved health outcomes. Next slide, please. The journey continues, and we're told it's a bit of a marathon. And to help us with that marathon, a number on this call will be aware of USAID's Next Gen Comprehensive Technical Assistance IDIQ. This is released and out. There are 5 different consortia that are available, engage with this. And what's exciting is that there'll be investments made at the country and the global level under this mechanism. There's something you all can do here. You can talk to your governments where you work to discuss the priorities of digital strengthening and regulatory strengthening within the pharmaceutical space. Discuss those with the Ministry of Health and encourage them to interact with USAID missions to be able to prioritize funds for this work. And I would encourage you all to do that as part of your role at the country level. Next slide, please. Lots of information today. My head hurts, and I'm sure yours does as well. But don't worry, with that phone that we all have, you can take scanned pictures on the screen, and you can go to those standards we've been talking about and have a look. You can also go to the MTaPS program, and also remind you that our other colleagues from CARE and also PQM Plus also have websites that they can drop in the chat to remind us of their resources as well. But don't let this just be the end of your journey with regulatory system strengthening, and particularly understanding the digitization of regulatory information systems. Use these resources to continue your journey. Next slide, please. As we conclude, I want you to take the time again to thank our participants. Love heart, Alireza, we're going to chop out your little advocacy video so you can arm us with that. Kyle, your particular detailed understanding of the digital world around us and extra thinking is really important. Toby, thank you again for USAID and their investments, and you're really pushing us along. And Suli, the detailed understanding of those standards are really important. all of these views from a range of questions today have been significant for us and helped us to better understand this environment and to move forward. If you would like to follow up further, on the screen are the names, titles, and emails of a range of experts within MTaPS. You've met Paul today, and we would like to encourage you. Also, of course, you can find our panelists on LinkedIn to be able to reach out to them directly. I would particularly like to thank our colleagues in the background. Lauren, please wave. Alicia, also please wave. They've made all this possible. But most importantly, you came and you listened. But my challenge is, what are you going to do? What are you going to act on this in order to improve our regulatory systems together? So as we close, I would like to invite you to put your video on and to wave to your colleagues as we depart. Great to see so many people from around the world. And thank you so much. And wishing you well in your day ahead. And if your colleagues missed today, there will be a recording that will come to you and you can pass that recording on to them. So thank you so much. Great to see people from around the world joining us today. Fantastic. Wishing you all well as you engage in the rest of your day. Thank you so much. Great. Amos, great to see you there. Bayo. Good. Didi, thank you for joining us today after being here yesterday. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a good one. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks,
and
everyone.
yeah, thank you, Dean. Really appreciate you managing the questions today. And I'm also now going to depart for my next meeting. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day. Bye for now.